Good morning, everyone. As I think everybody crawls from bed across the street after a heavy night, I suppose we can get started with this routing security talk. We have a very interesting lineup this morning that will be taking us through evolution of routing security, RPKI, BGP misuse, and so forth over the last year and a half. And just give us an update on where things are. As always, interact, ask questions, and I'd like to get started with Toma Gavryshenkov from Curator.
All right, thank you, Mark. So I guess tomorrow's social party was really good. I don't see quite a lot of people. To start it up, let's get back to a sad event which occurred about 10 months ago. In April 2018, a cryptocurrency exchange named My Other Wallet recorded an incident of a man-in-the-middle attack. The incident lasted for 2 hours until someone finally noticed the issue and fixed it. Actually reached out to ISPs to fix that. In a few hours, that was already on the news. And here's how it basically worked. Under normal conditions, a browser starts a session with an arbitrary website with a DNS query. An authoritative DNS server, which in case of myotherwallet.com used to be Amazon Route 53, responds with an IP address of the requested domain. And after that, the browser sends an HTTP request, or better, fires up a TLS session with that IP address. Then the server, again hosted in our case within an Amazon product, responds with a TLS certificate, the signature of the latter being then checked against the built-in browser trust store. So what attackers did in this case differently was a BGP hijack of the Route 53 IP prefix, which hosted the authoritative server for the myotherwallet.com domain. An initial query would then go to a rogue DNS server, which responded with an IP address of a server controlled by the attacker. After that, just like in a normal case, the browser sent a TLS hello, which didn't go to Amazon this time, but instead traveled all the way down to a cold and hopeless place somewhere in Siberia. That place used a self-signed TLS certificate, so the browser would issue a scary warning. Yet the attackers were able to withdraw some crypto stuff from some of the users' accounts still, because a certain portion of users happily clicked through the certificate warnings anyway. Let it be clear, it's not that easy to get through HTTPS certificate warnings with today's Chrome or Firefox. Sometimes it's even impossible, depends on an error though. In today's internet, a harmful man-in-the-middle attack is quite a rare thing. A few orders of magnitude more often, it's either a captive portal doing captive things, or a site blocking enforced by law, or simply a configuration error, which can occur both on the server side, like an accidentally expired certificate. It always happens accidentally. And on the client side, for instance, a mistaken parental control setup. User basically learns by heart to circumvent the HTTPS errors because they have done it 1,000 times before, and nothing bad has ever happened after that. Which is why the most popular suggestion on how to fix the issue of BGP hijacking against an HTTPS portal is to further strengthen the way a contemporary browser reports a certificate issue. If we say won't allow to click through that error at all, then the issue is completely gone. Unfortunately, it turns out it's not really that simple. The first time I faced BGP hijacking myself dates back to the year 2012. Our only business back in those days was DDoS mitigation. The problem with DDoS mitigation is that sometimes a criminal is really highly motivated to bring a network service down. That doesn't usually happen with, say, carpet bombing blackmail attacks, yet once in a while, an attack is ordered by market competition of the victim, and depending on the market situation, a competition can go to great length to achieve what they try to achieve. And of course, hijacking is quite a reliable way to do that, costly though, but the cost is always about a trade-off between how much you pay and how much you get in return. At that time, we happened to already have an internal BGP monitoring tool, which we then polished a bit and released to public in a year. However, as we examined possible consequences of a hijacking, we figured out that almost no matter how secure is the configuration of a web server, a man-in-the-middle attack through hijacking would still see a success. The problem is certificate authorities which sign certificate with keys reflected in the browser trust store only need to first check if the entity requesting an HTTPS certificate for a website is actually in charge of managing that website. And due to an obvious chicken and egg dilemma, here they do it in insecure ways. I submitted the detailed outline of how such an attack could be carried as a talk proposal for a Black Hat conference in Vegas. The proposal got approved. The slides and the white paper are available on the conference website. In that white paper, we examine how certificate authorities implement the remote server checking. Basically, they generate a random token, a random sequence of characters, present it to the user who requests the certificate, and expect to see the token after a while, either by requesting a certain page via clear text HTTP, or by looking for presence of that token in DNS-TXT records for the target domain, or by checking whois records. There used to also be more exotic methods to achieve the same goal, but those three are quite enough for our consideration because it's the user who chooses the one particular checking method and not the certificate authority. As the result, an offender who applies for a certificate for an arbitrary website on the web and gets a token which would be then checked, can then supply the verifying script with the token through hijacking an IP prefix of that website, or a prefix of its DNS server, or something else. It depends on the website infrastructure. In turn, a certificate authority would issue a perfectly valid TLS certificate and would send it to the offender. That certificate could then just be used in man-in-the-middle attacks via hijacking again, or via any other traffic redirection method convenient for the attacker. If the server resides in Korea and all of the users are also in Korea and there's a certificate authority, say in Poland or Spain, then adjusted for internet topology, a limited range hijacking would go totally unnoticed. The white paper defined two different types of a BGP hijacking attack, which were mostly different only in how stealthy an attack could go from the victim's point of view. One important consequence was that for such an attack implemented properly, there was at that point virtually no way of telling it in fact occurred, much less of investigating it. So I have published the white paper, and within a few months I've collected feedback from the trust authority industry experts. It is just one article, but there were more on different news websites. With my unfortunate hands-on experience from 2012, I was thrilled to see how the issue is probably going to be resolved in the most elegant and beautiful way. Guess what? What I got instead was a reassuring statement that the issue highlighted wasn't really an issue. The articles pointed out first that the BGP hijacking issue alone was almost purely theoretical. Imagine how I felt reading this 3 years since it happened to my own network. Let alone using it for HTTPS certificate hijacking. Next, they enumerated a few features of the web PKI, such as extended validation, all first letters capital, or public key pinning, and stated those would be the final ultimate solution for the certificate hijacking problem soon. Finally, the article stated that today's CA would never be checking the token with a single script and would only issue after a handful of checks which reported consensus. The author also called us a BGP monitoring company, which we wasn't in fact at the moment. We were still a DDoS mitigation company, maybe 99%, and the BGP monitoring tool called Radar was developed as a free community project, but that was much less important. Okay, so here's a quick outline of how the CA industry planned to deal with that back 3.5 years ago. We could have waited for a longer time to see how did that go, but as we'll see, that's not needed. What's the ultimate result as it is today? The first statement was that BGP hijacking doesn't happen in practice. Someone I've been talking to coined the term conference type attack, meaning that such a threat doesn't have to be a part of practical web security risk assessment. However, it's 2018, and as we can see, those attacks do happen. The essential prerequisite, though, is a motivated attacker hunting for a price convincing enough, and cryptocurrency exchanges are an obvious threat. The My Other Wallet case missed the certificate part, though. But the attackers in that case probably do not follow conference agenda as thoroughly as all of us here do. Too bad for them, because if they did, they could have been sitting on the wallet user accounts for much longer than 2 hours. Another funny thing is that since the year 2015, different people on multiple occasions wrote me emails or even reached out to me in person to clarify the details of that potential threat or to discuss strange issues they have seen. And last year, on 2 separate occasions, unrelated to each other, the topic to discuss was a certificate in public certificate transparency logs that the website owner had reasons to believe they couldn't have ever consciously applied for. It's quite hard to tell what really happened there, because as I've said before, the certificate issue is challenging enough to detect, let alone investigate. For instance, on average, there are hundreds of Amazon prefixes sitting in hijacks or route leaks every day. And for any website using Route 53, it would take a great effort to sort out that high stack pushing for one needle. A potential offender in both cases is assumed to be quite motivated, though. Next up, extended validation, all first letters capital. For those lucky of you who doesn't deal with online banking, EV is essentially that little green box in the address bar of your web browser where the name of the company owning the website is written. You are only granted such a certificate after you provide additional documents, such as a photo of your office's reception desk or monthly electricity bills, because if you pay the electricity bills, then your website is certainly secure. Don't ask. Anyhow, on mobile devices, extended validation box even used to replace the address bar completely, which led to funny vulnerabilities, such as a fork obtaining a fraudulent certificate for a company called Identity Verified. That phrase was then displayed instead of the address bar, ruling out virtually any possibility that anyone would detect a phishing site behind that certificate. It's 2019 now, and EV is effectively dead. Mobile devices don't show or support it anymore. Some of them never did, like all the Windows Phone 8 devices. Desktop browsers are also apparently slowly moving out of that support. Websites prefer not to use it, not only because it's so much cheaper to go with ordinary domain validity, but also because today an HTTPS certificate renewal process is expected to be 100% automated, and automating EV is hell incorporated. Again, BGP hijacking is a rare threat today, while forgetting to renew your HTTPS certificate is a routine mistake. And with EV, you wouldn't usually fix that in less than a couple of days. Here we see how a remedy was in fact worse than the disease. What's next? Public key pinning, dead. Removed from Chrome a long time ago. Still, I would personally oppose that change, but I'm not blaming Chrome developers for that because they have some solid reasons to do that. What PKP was designed for was to put a number of certificates into the browser cache during the very first HTTPS request and then tell the browser that the remote website must never be communicated to if the remote TLS server authenticates itself with a certificate missing from the cache. Now imagine what would happen if someone, such as an angry former employee, logs onto the website and puts only one rogue certificate with a 4 years lifetime into the PKP header and then deletes the certificate. That's called hostile pinning, and the website would be then unreachable for most of the users for about 4 years, which is bad. Anyhow, PKP has never really seen adoption because, again, updating the PKP value for any today's web server is very, very hard to automate. I know I did it. And the last one. Checking the token from multiple places on the internet, a multi-home check. This, dear audience, is where the real fun starts. Well, the majority part is just broken here. I won't go into details now, but it's hard to, if even possible, to do that right. Also, distributing multiple clients across the internet topology in such a way that they would stay independent in case of an arbitrary BGP incident is a very tough engineering task. But let's assume trust authorities could in fact implement a multi-home checking properly, somehow. Do they do that now? After a couple of years, it came to my attention, and again in a funny way, remind me to tell that story during Q&A if we have time, that someone else except me finally got interested with the issue. I mean, someone innocent, that's important. Guess who? Scientists. Good news, everyone. A team, including Jennifer Rexford from Princeton, did what scientists usually do with white papers they see. They have checked my results. In that white paper, I haven't actually stated I've carried out the attack myself, and frankly, I can't say I did that. I've tried, but stopped after the token was checked. I needed next to pay for the certificate to obtain it. And that was where I suddenly thought about some 3-letter abbreviations and then decided it's best to stop just in case. Princeton folks were more desperate. It turned out that for a number of reputed certificate authorities, no one was actually ever checking from multiple sources, so fraudulent certificates could have been actually signed and sent to malicious users. If a conscientious CA would use multiple clients around the globe, then it's quite tough to find a conscientious CA these days. The folks continued and in a year released another paper much more complicated. They defined 3 more attack types, gave all those 5 fancy sciencey names, and tested the result of those. I'm leaving a link here. I urge you to read it. It's a very cool work. And since then, almost every month, Google Scholar pings me with a new academic reference to my presentation from 2015. Here's a short list of some of them. So it turns out that by letting the cat out of the box, I wasn't able to get anywhere close to a solution for the root cause, but instead have started a moderately successful research direction. Why do I say that the root cause isn't settled? Because no one of the involved parties really cared thereafter. What did CAs do? A couple of things. First, certificate transparency. Second, DNS certificate authority authorization. All first letters capital, you know. No, I'm kidding now. In fact, CT is a truly brilliant breakthrough. at least now we could become aware of an incident as it goes, which is so much more than nothing. Hardly anyone in enterprise environment, let alone non-profits, is monitoring all the CT lists for fraudulent certificates in real time, though. And I may be wrong here, but hardly anyone is ever going to do that. So a certain attack window ranging from hours to months still persists. Also, OCSP revocation would involve human factor, which also takes a lot of time. All that put aside, a great technology. CAA, though, solves kind of different problem. You can still use the same CA, say Let's Encrypt, that was used by the TLS service owner. Also, CAA is again a resource record in the zone, like TXT, and could also be replaced by an attacker. It might have been slightly better in that regard if you could glue it, maybe. Anyhow, it's rather far from being a solution. Oh, here's a fun question. Why did the MyEtherWallet attackers hijack the root 53 prefix instead of EC2 prefix, where the website was hosted at the moment? That's, you know, more of an effort. The scheme is more complicated. You need to set up a DNS server where you could have just get along with a lone HTTPS server. So why? Well, assuming that those folks were reasonable, which proves false quite frequently for criminals, but given that assumption, there's an obvious answer. An average DNS server, which plays the authoritative role for a website, gets orders of magnitude less traffic than the website it serves. Handling all the Amazon web traffic, even for a single /24, is quite expensive, while doing it selectively, the way it was done in the MyEtherWallet incident, is very cost effective. That makes DNS a more likely target for future BGP attacks. In fact, hijacking a DNS server opens even more possibilities. You can sniff on the zone, you can trick cloud container orchestration tools, and so on. But our today's focus are only internet-facing HTTPS servers. Here is how the security tool looks in Radar. Once again, for each Amazon autonomous system, there's a number of BGP incidents happening every day. Don't blame Amazon, though. It's the same nearly for any well-known cloud services provider, a hosting company, or a DNS provider. That's a complete mess. Any autonomous system administrator can get an access to its own security information instantly. It only takes time to register on that website. Please forgive me if I've been lost in all the mergers and acquisitions, but last time I've checked, no certificate authority representative has been using the tool. If any CA is in fact doing that, then sorry, and please send me an email so that we can figure out how to tailor the service better for your needs. The next involved party, obviously, is the DNS community. Well, things here are slightly better. There's a tool that can save us the day, which is DNSSEC, but whoops, the adoption rate was low so far. Here's a fun insight. Let me remind you that the incident with MyEtherWallet happened on 24th of April. Before that, almost since the domain creation, they were using Amazon Route 53. The source of the data is security trails. Sorry, that's somehow missing from the slides PDF. Route 53 doesn't support DNSSEC. Well, as a registrar, Amazon supports DNSSEC for domain registration, but then to use it, you need to move your domain to another provider. So a month after the hijacking incident, myetherwallet.com started to move its domain names to Cloudflare and finally abandoned Route 53 at all in September. We don't exactly know the reason, but this might be the first public case when a company dropped Route 53 because of the lack of DNSSEC support. Boom. So, what did the ISP community do to prevent BGP incidents? Well, also a couple of things. First of them wasn't enough, so there was a plan B, which, guess what, got low adoption so far, but we're not giving up, and now we have plan C, which we can contribute to, quite far from the final ultimate solution though, but promising. I will hand the details to the next speaker. So a sad thing, though, is that apparently we cannot even conduct academic BGP experiments in wild nature, because BGP software present on the internet is sometimes old, sometimes buggy, sometimes old and vulnerable, and it literally takes years to update whatever routing-related piece of code there is. I've never seen, say, configure or WannaCry victims yelling at the malware authors, because everyone knows that an insecure system on the internet is pretty much doomed. But somehow it's not related to insecure BGP software, so poor researchers who occasionally triggered a bug in FRR this January were put under quite serious public pressure. Maybe it's just me, but that's sad. Long story short, I've seen people before criticizing me for not being optimistic enough in my public speeches, so I listen and I hear what's said. And I've put some funny text on the next slide. Yeah, see, it's pink Comic Sans on top of a yellow oval. Must be very funny. What's not funny, though, is that for years, IETF and others have been designing hardened transport protocols to protect users' data. The most contemporary design is Quick with HTTP3, which adds up quite significantly to the system requirements of a web server for the sake of encryption and data protection. A funny thing is that one of the Quick design goals was, okay, that wasn't really stated in the spec, but that was always implied, to protect innocent users exercising the freedom of speech against evil state actors. I cannot really pick a proper word to describe how cheap such attacks are for any possible state actor, even if they would want to avoid being accused, which, as we know, isn't always the case. Reassuring users that everything is going just fine works for a certain period of time, but I don't really want to be on this planet anymore when that period of time comes to an end. Another complaint is that we can't really say we have a proper solution. That's right, it's disappointing. But we don't quite have a long document presenting a renowned final ultimate solution to all the problems we have. But what we have is a set of tools that we don't use, but instead live in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet, stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." Each of those technologies could limit the exposure, yet none gets adopted. There are also some simple things to do. Say, adopt a multi-hop session with our radar to monitor your own autonomous system. Here's a link on the slide where you could do that. It's free and it's easier than adopting a puppy and much more fun. I personally prefer kittens. Anyhow, the combined technical depth in the internet doesn't appear to shrink, it only grows further. It only takes some time to contribute into paying off the debt, so why not to start now, please? Thank you. Any questions? Okay, so we are quite behind our schedule, so if you have any questions, then reach out to me outside of this room, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Toma. If there's any questions towards the end, that should be fine as well. So if you think about anything that is spoken about, we can just ask it later on. Quick note on the internet, we're having another issue with CreoNet, unfortunately. So if things seem a bit slow, it's because of that. Many apologies. They're trying to get that fixed. Next up, it will be Job Schneider talking to us about RPKI.
Good morning. Let's wait for the slides to show up. All right. My name is Job Snijders. I work for NTT Communications and I specialize in routing security. And on this lovely morning, I would like to provide you with an update on some of the developments that have occurred in recent months and will happen in the coming 12 to 18 months on a global scale related to routing security. A small warning, some of the statements are forward-looking. Please don't hold it against me if I turn out to be wrong about certain timelines. Quick recap, why routing security even matters. An advantage of enforcing your customers and peers to register routes in one of the mechanisms, like IRR or WHOIS or RPKI or whatnot, is that it creates a trail that is auditable. This helps against malicious actors because it imposes a higher barrier. But more commonly, bugs happen, be it in your network automation system or in your vendor's, your router's operating system. I've encountered a situation where a certain router was no longer honoring parts of its running configuration, specifically filters that we have had in place. And in that moment, you are relying on your neighbors to have filters in place to cover for the software defect on your side. And then finally, mistakes happen. The keys on our keyboard, the numbers, are awfully close to each other. The 4 is right next to the 5. It is really easy to make misconfigurations, and without routing security filters in place, these misconfigurations can negatively affect our businesses. So, a lot of people have come to take a very dim view on routing security. They say it's useless, we stand no chance, there is so much garbage in the system, nobody will cooperate, there's all these, they're discouraged. However, I think if we look at routing security, it is not a concept with an endless amount of problems. In fact, I think many of the issues in routing security are a finite list. And if we're dealing with a finite list, it means that if we tackle these issues one by one, at some point we will have significant improvement in the routing ecosystem. So I've set out to collect a list of issues, and I will present these issues to you and offer solutions that I think are appropriate. The issues can roughly be categorized in that IRRs contain too much garbage, that there is no filtering at internet exchanges, that we have no deployable forms of path validation, and finally, that the software ecosystem is not robust enough. So we'll go through these 4 categories, and if you have questions at any time, feel free to come to the microphone. So what's the problem with IRR? It turns out that some of the IRR databases do not perform any validation whatsoever. They do not consult the owner of a resource, the owner of a prefix, whether they agreed with the creation of a route object or not. At the moment of writing or presenting, NTT is using 11 IRR sources that are not validating, amongst other sources that do apply validation, so those are left out of this slide. And to address these, there are 2 types of solutions. You can either lock down a database and perform validation against the wishes of the owner, or we can apply filtering at the mirror level. And I'll go through what this means step by step. Previously, up until 7 or 8 months ago, anybody could register any resource in the RIPE IRR database that was not managed by RIPE NCC. In other words, RIPE NCC's database performed validation for RIPE managed space, but if you wanted to register, say, a PNIC space in the RIPE IRR, nothing would stop you from doing so. Luckily, the RIPE community agreed that this was a significant security hole, and a few steps were taken, and all of this problem space was under the name of NWI5. The steps that were taken is that in the RIPE IRR, you can no longer register non-RIPE IP address space. This means that if you want to create a APNIC or a route object that covers APNIC space in the RIPE IR, you can no longer do that. And then secondly, because the RIPE IR has existed for more than a decade, maybe 15 years or so, over time, many route objects had accumulated that did not belong in the RIPE IRR. And these route objects that were never validated against the wishes of the owner of the prefix were moved into a separate IRR source that was named more appropriately the RIPE non-auth database, or RIPE non-authoritative. And furthermore, the rules to create route objects that do fit within the RIPE IRR were improved. And you may ask yourself, this is a thing on the other side of the planet. It's an 11-hour plane ride to get to the RIPE NCC offices. What does this have to do with me? But in the RIPE non-authoritative database, there are roughly 3,000 route objects that cover APNIC space, and it is not clear whether those objects were created with the best of intentions, or perhaps fraudulent intentions, or are simply legacy objects that should have been removed years ago. And those route objects do affect operations of APNIC members, because each of these route objects punches holes in BGP filters. All right, RIPE has been fixed. There's only 10 IRRs to go now. At the moment of presenting, unfortunately, the IRR operated by ARIN, the North American Registry for Internet Resources, allows you to register anything. They do not, the only thing that's required is that you pay your bill to ARIN. But after that, you can register APNIC prefixes in this IR, RIPE prefixes in this IR, and there is no validation whatsoever whether those route objects were created with your authorization. So here is a route object that was created by a friend of mine without my consent. Luckily, the ARIN community has agreed that this is a significant security issue through numerous rounds of consultation, and at this point the ARIN staff has indicated sort of a message like, we will either improve this or we have to abandon this type of service, because continuing to move forward with an entirely unvalidated IRR is a risk to all of us. So it's almost solved. Great. Now there's only 9 IRRs left that we need to solve, and you can kind of sense the theme of this presentation. The remaining 9, however, are harder to tackle. Some of these are not operated by member-driven organizations. Some of the IRRs are in fact operated by volunteers or commercial organizations that have their own policies on what they allow or do not allow in their IRR. Some of these have 24/7 staff available to facilitate the operation of the IRR database. Some of them are operated on a best effort basis. We need a bigger hammer. In order to explain this bigger hammer to you, I would like to provide you with an overview of how the IR system actually works from a filter generation perspective. Although there are many, many IR databases operated by 30, 40 organizations, the IR system in totality is accessed predominantly through 2 gateways, namely whois.radb.net and rr.ntt.net. And these 2 endpoints are the entry point into the IR system. And for instance, the BGP Q3 software by default points to whois.radb.net, as does PEVAL, part of the IR toolset, and others. And both these services, or servers, operate software called IRRD. And since we are now looking at a duopoly, perhaps we can use this duopoly for the good of the internet. So a more visual display of what happens in the IR system. We have all these databases on the left side. They are mirrored into these 2 aggregators of sort, and then clients query the aggregator to obtain data to construct BGP prefix filters. Now, my proposal is that we can leverage RPKI data to drown out conflicting IR information. You have maybe heard of using RPKI to do something called BGP origin validation, where the trick is that every BGP update that comes in can be validated against a table that is constructed using RPKI data. But I would argue that we can apply that same origin validation mechanism not just to BGP updates in real time on our routers, but we can also apply this mechanism to IRR route objects because of the similarity between a BGP update and an IRR route object. Both of them cover a prefix, both of them have an origin ASN, and this will allow for fascinating use cases. So the trick will be to extend IRRD in such a way that it will suppress IRR information that is in conflict with published RPKI ROAS. This means that the aggregators can apply a filter on the mirroring connections that feed into these aggregators. So the moment a database like NTT-Com or RADB contains data that is in conflict with published RPKI ROAS, the aggregator is in fact in a position to suppress that information and prevent it from propagating into the tools that generate our filters. A quick summary on how IRR and RPKI are different and why this approach is feasible. An IRR route object tells us nothing other than about the object itself. And what I mean with that is that an IRR route object cannot suppress or negate or indicate that other objects are incorrect. They all exist independently. And given the fact that many of the IRR sources have different rules for validation, this leads to interesting situations where it's a positive attestation that the prefix origin combination described in the IR route object may be one of many possibilities. And so it cannot be used to detect hijacks. I call this a non-exclusive type of object. RPKI ROAS, on the other hand, are specifically or semantically have very different properties, namely that the objects can only be created by the owner of a resource, and if an RPKI ROA exists, it supersedes or is of a higher ranking than IRR objects. And this means that RPKI ROAS can be used to apply the origin validation procedure as described in RFC 6811, whereas IRR objects cannot be used for that procedure. Or phrased differently, IRR objects are great to generate filters on the sessions facing your customers, but they are less suitable for peering sessions or the sessions you have with your upstream provider. Whereas RPKI ROAS can be used to filter all three categories. You can apply origin validation on every type of eBGP session. So, using RPKI to suppress conflicting IR information has two advantages. The first advantage is that it provides the industry with a consistent way to get rid of still legacy or outdated route objects. At this moment in time, if you observe a route object that should not exist and you are the owner of the prefix, your only recourse is to reach out to the operator of the IR database and ask them kindly, can you remove this object? And many IR operators will be inclined to follow your wishes, but this obviously doesn't happen in real time and you're left at the mercy of the IR operator. And what's worse, even if they honor your request and remove the route object, there is nothing in the system that stops the route object from reappearing. And there are many documented cases of network operators that create incorrect proxy route registrations in an automated fashion. And that means that every time you reach out to remove the object, within 24 hours it reappears because there's a script doing incorrect things. So using RPKI ROAS to suppress conflicting IR information not only helps clean up the last 20 years of garbage, but it also prevents the incorrect route objects from reoccurring in the system. So not only does it stop scripts that are programming the IR in incorrect ways, it also reduces the chances of attackers using the IR to facilitate hijacks. So it cleans up the past and it protects you going forward. These are two very significant advantages in my opinion. And with that, I think we have solved all 11 of the non-validating IRRs. Their software to facilitate this process is funded by NTT and programmed by Dashcare. All of it is open source in the spirit of the original IRRD implementation. And I hope that within a few weeks, perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, we can release the latest and greatest version of IRRD that paves the way to implement RPKI origin validation on the IR level. So stay tuned for this. For reference, if you have a PNIC space, please register it in the APNIC IRR. Don't go to RDB, don't use NTT-Com. The APNIC IRR is the appropriate place for APNIC IP addresses. So let's focus on internet exchanges. Over the last 2 years, the industry has spent significant time to motivate internet exchanges to apply filters on their route servers. And a common argument that I've heard throughout the years is filtering is so hard and we don't have the resources to develop software to implement correct filtering on route servers. Luckily, this no longer is the case. There are multiple open source projects that can facilitate the generation of secure route server configurations. And I would specifically like to mention IXP Manager, as developed by our friends from INEX, and a route server. And these two implementations have nothing in common with each other, and it's good to have diversity when you're operating an internet exchange. On a website called peering.exposed, I'm keeping track of which internet exchanges are applying filters on their route servers. And I'm very happy to report that as of this moment, if we look at the top 10 IXPs by size, either be it traffic or amount of members that they have, that 9 out of the 10 are in fact filtering. And if the largest internet exchanges can do it, then everybody can do it. So filtering at IXPs is hard. I consider that a solved problem. If we look at the position of route servers in the ecosystem, I would argue that route servers are the ideal place to start with the strictest possible filtering. By definition, a route server does not carry a full table. The route server has a set of routes available to every participant, but it depends on those participants using the route servers or even being present at the internet exchange. And there's no contractual obligation for route servers to carry any prefixes at all, since there is no guarantees that they can carry these prefixes. And when a route server starts dropping invalid announcements, the worst case scenario is that traffic is rerouted. In the case of, for instance, NTT or AT&T dropping invalid announcements based on RPKI data, since we are not pointing default anywhere, we are so-called transit-free, dropping invalids could result in outages because there's no alternative path for networks that are single-homed behind us. But in the case of an internet exchange and a route server, there are alternative paths, there are transits, and this puts I think, the right amount of incentive on all participants to engage in this type of filtering, because at worst, if you misconfigure your RPKI ROAS, you'll see an increase in latency. And I think an increase in latency is a more gentle suggestion to correct your RPKI ROAS than black holing your traffic. So route servers should take the lead on RPKI deployment and be the first to implement invalid is reject policies. Keep in mind, internet exchanges in essence are layer 2 fabrics, so the comments I made are specific to the route servers. If you use direct eBGP sessions over an internet exchange fabric, it will be your responsibility to ensure you have proper filters in place. Now I'll tell you something strange. I don't think everybody needs to do RPKI origin validation. If we look at today's internet ecosystem, in the last decade we've seen tremendous consolidation towards very large players. And with that I mean that many ISPs ceased to operate their own infrastructure and instead moved into the cloud. The centralization or consolidation of the internet has certain downsides, but it also means that there is less companies that need to do action to positively benefit billions of end users. If we look at, for instance, Cloudflare, who provide authoritative DNS services to millions of domains, and Google, who operate a DNS resolver available to the public, which is used by tens of millions of people, if just those two apply origin validation, billions of end users already benefit. Let's go over that. For instance, Google and Akamai have the opportunity to peer with each other directly in hundreds of facilities, and if they apply origin validation, attackers cannot insert themselves anymore between these two entities. This brings me to why the lack of path validation maybe is less of an issue than we think it is. Because the internet keeps directly connecting with each other, the average AS path is roughly 4, and it has been 4 for 25 years now, but the default free zone is growing. There are 67,000 ASNs or so in the default free zone. This means that we keep connecting directly to each other. And most of these direct connections are motivated by financial incentives, because if you cut out the middleman, often you'll see cost savings. Now, in this context, in context of directly connecting with each other, one could argue that we have path validation for one hop. And maybe that's enough. I think the majority of the internet's traffic flows across links that represent AS paths of just one hop, because it's the most economic thing to do. And if we combine this phenomena with origin validation, you actually have a very strong protective mechanism in place where attackers cannot insert themselves between these entities that have relations such as authoritative to resolver DNS. So maybe one hop of validation is good enough for all intents and purposes. Then another aspect is that over the years, the software ecosystem related to RPKI has not been at its peak. But now in 2019, the situation is vastly different. And I actually see that I need to update my slide, because a week ago Cloudflare published yet another RPKI validation implementation. But if we look at the RPKI software ecosystem, you can now choose from 3 and soon 4 validation implementations. And what this means is that there is active competition, friendly competition, let's be clear, between multiple organizations that are developing software out in the open. And in order for network operators, for there to be at least 2 excellent choices, you need 3 or 4 implementations that are striving to be the best. If we look at the DNS ecosystem, it is functioning the way it is because there is more than bind. And in the RPKI world, we used to face a similar issue where at some point the RIPE NCC RPKI validator was the only choice that was somewhere close to being useful for production environments. Now, in 2019, the landscape is very different and you have more than one choice, you have more than 2 choices. This is great. And if we look at the BGP side of things, you also have a multitude of choices available to you. All routing vendors that take the internet ecosystem serious have implemented origin validation in their BGP stacks. You can do origin validation on Cisco, on Juniper, Nokia, BIRD, FRR, OpenBGPD. All these implementations have support for origin validation and have had so for a long period of time. Now this of course doesn't mean they're bug-free, but it does mean that if one of them is not up to spec, you can at least move to another implementation. And at this point in time, I would argue that the only way for these software systems to improve is if we start to use them. Software cannot attain higher quality if it's developed in a vacuum. There is a feedback loop between users out in the field and the software developers, and that feedback loop needs to start moving, and the only way to start moving it forward is by deploying the software and filing bug reports should we find them. So, not a healthy ecosystem, solved. Let's take a quick look at the timeline. If you are an ISP, if you own prefixes, I think now is a great time to start creating RPKI ROAS. If you create RPKI ROAS, you facilitate other entities on the internet to apply better filtering related to your resources, and this reduces the chances of your business being affected by misconfigurations or hijacks. And creating ROAS in many parts of the world, specifically APNIC and RIPE, is quite easy. You go to the portal, you click around a little bit, and voila, you have ROAS. If you run an internet exchange, now is a great time to deploy route origin validation on your route servers. The software is available, there's many IXPs already doing it, so you'd not be the first, you'd find yourself an excellent company, and there is no downsides to this, in my opinion. Other than that, many ISPs have started applying origin validation already. 2 specific examples are Cloudflare and AT&T. But if we, for instance, zoom in on the Netherlands, every access ISP in the Netherlands is working on origin validation. And at this point in time, the Netherlands is actually one of the top-ranking countries when it comes to origin validation, which means that it is technically possible to start deploying invalid is reject policies. In 2019, when we get to IRD version 4.1, we can see the effects of applying origin validation based on RPKI data to clean up IRR data. So this means later in the year, the IRR system will see significant cleanups because new software has become available to do so. Related to the timeline is my hope that at some point the AirIntel situation improves. For you, those of you that are not familiar with what the AirIntel situation is, at the moment, if you want to obtain access to AirIn's public key, you are required to provide explicit consent to a legal document that is perhaps not written in your native language. And this legal barrier prevents the TEL from being included in software distributions, because software distributions are not entities that can provide explicit consent. And that means that the AirIntel is far less widely deployed than, say, the APNIC TEL. Recent measurements from a few weeks ago showed that all of the networks applying origin validation that about 20% of them do not carry the ARIN RPKI tail. So this is a practical issue that I hope can be resolved later this year. So my conclusion is that things are not looking as grim as you might expect them to be. There's many things in the pipeline that provide an optimistic view that will improve routing security's posture in the wild. And this makes me quite hopeful, which I think is a nice way to end this presentation. With that, I would like to open up the microphone lines for comments, suggestions, remarks, anything you'd like to share with me. And if you don't want to step to the microphone, feel free to email me at any time at job@ntt.net. I'm happy to help competitors, customers, and peering partners alike.
Hi, thank you for having this session, Mark. I have one story to share with you and one comments in.
What is your name and organization?
My name is Taiji from Japan. Taiji. One AS in Japan started issuing ROA in 2015, and they expected unreachable prefixes in Europe. The reason why they had unreachable prefixes in Europe was the invalid route comparing with ROA. So it's a very straight story, but the story is not finished. The Japanese AS was felt very difficulty to contact to the European AS, and it makes very big delay to find out the reason why they have such prefix. The reason was that the actual announcing prefix length was changed after the 2015. So, and this story, but this story don't show that your approach is over-filtering, I think. The important thing is that one more feedback cycle to fix the ROA comparing with the ISP's actual routing. So this is not specific tasks, but I want to raise this feedback group for raising your filtering approach will have more effectiveness. And
if I may reply, you are absolutely right that ROAs that are either initially misconfigured or become misconfigured over time, because there can be discrepancies between the network topology at the moment a ROA was created and later on when, for whatever reason, prefixes are deaggregated. And the tricky thing with feedback loops, and because this is a security feature, we cannot differentiate between incidents that arise from unintentional misconfigurations or that arise from adversarial activities. The good news, however, is that through conferences like Apricot or RIPE or NANOC, awareness is being spread about the ramifications of misconfigured ROAs. And at this point, we are relying on the human network, us operators coming together in rooms and helping each other point out that there can be negative effects resulting from this misconfiguration. And I think the nice thing about the companies reaching out to each other and encouraging each other to correct the ROAS is that if I pick up the phone and call somebody and tell them, hey, I think you have misconfigured something, and as a result of that action, the misconfiguration is removed and the ROA is aligned with the intentions of the network operator, that my phone call resolves the issue for everybody that is doing origin validation. So the more networks there are that apply origin validation and the more outreach they do to encourage people to correct their ROAS, the workload is distributed amongst many organizations, and that will have positive impact. But since it is a security feature, it will be very hard to create more feedback loops than are already present in the system. So I think education and raising awareness are the most sustainable way to prevent this from happening. You had a second comment, I believe?
Oh, my second comment, thank you. About the historical address. And in AP region, we have historical address. It was assigned before the establishment of EPNIC. But I observed the resource certificate for historical address is not issued. So we need to find out how we have a next step for that resources.
Absolutely. My hope is that RPKI ROA publication becomes available to each and every network operator. For instance, there are issues related to legacy space, but also there are complexities related to the model where you have an RAR and under that an NIR, such as JPNIC or the Korean NIC. And as far as I know, JPNIC has years ago already done an excellent implementation of RPKI services for Japanese operators, whereas the Korean NIC, as far as I know, has not yet made RPKI services available to Korean operators. So yes, there are some instances where RPKI may not yet be available, but from a global perspective, the majority of address space can be covered by ROAS nowadays, and I hope to see that trend continue.
Hi, Anurag Bhatia from Hurricane Electric. Excellent talk, job as usual. I have a quick question about how you are adding the ROA validated entries in the entity comms registry. I just checked for a prefix where I have created ROAs, and when I query entity, I do see with remarks that it's allowed up to /48. By default, RADB mirrors entity and few others. Why I don't see that entry in RADB right now?
That's a great question. I appreciate the level of detail you've put into your research. The RADB mirrors NTT-Com, which is one of the IRR sources. The NTT-Com IRD instance ingests RPKI data through some software I wrote, but that is a separate database operated within the same IRD instance. And RADB at this moment is not mirroring the RPKI database. And because they are separate databases, and on an IRD configuration level, you have to specify which of the databases you want to mirror. NTT-Com is mirrored, RPKI is not.
Okay.
And it is worthy of consideration to discuss with RADB whether they should add RPKI data in the same way NTT does, or whether their standpoint is that they want to focus on IRR data exclusively. But you're right, if you want to use RPKI data as if it were an IRR source, you will need to point your software to rr.ntt.net to make use of that feature, which you're welcome to do. So as far as I know, Hurricane Electric uses RADB to generate its filters. Feel free to use our IRD instance instead.
We'll surely consider that. The other question I have for you is about the AS sets. Is by any chance there would be anything new with respect to AS sets that someone cannot add another entry in the AS set and then leak it after entering it with the next modification of the RPKI check?
As of this moment, there is no way in our production environments to prevent unwanted inclusion in another person's AS set. The permission model of AS sets is unilateral. This means that the publisher of the AS set is the only entity that can influence the contents of that AS set. And as of now, there is no way to prevent this. The proper way to address this issue would be to participate in the IETF, either in the GROW working group or CIDR Ops working group, and propose a mechanism to address this issue.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
If you need help participating in IETF, I'm happy to have an offline chat with you.
Hi, Dima from ZDS. I think you just gave a very instrumental speech, but I think you just missed something when you were talking about the RPK software ecosystem. Actually, there is an open source relying party software called RPSTR, which is short for relying party security technology for internet routing, which, by the way, is managed by me and some other guys who used to work for BBS. I think we are doing a great job there. And in addition to the RPK data validation, RPSTR also allows the operator to do some RPK local control, which is in alignment with the specification of IFC 8416. So yeah, just a quick tip. The next time, I think when you're talking about the RPK software exit, you might as well mention this software. And I hope NTT could give a try on this software. And if you have any question when you use it, come to me. And you can get access to the software via bgpsecurity.net. Thank you.
I am very happy to hear that your software distribution is alive and maintained. And I'll be sure to include a reference to your software in subsequent versions of this slide deck. Thank you for the addition.
Thank you.
No more questions? Well, as I mentioned before, feel free to reach out via email if you have follow-up questions at a later point. Thank you for your time. I wish you a good day.
Excellent, thank you very much, Job. We'll have Anurag coming up to give us an update about the misuse of AS1, 2, and 3.
This is not working. No. I can probably give an introduction, and meanwhile we fix the problem with the clicker. My name is Anurag Bhatia. I work at Hurricane Electric. We operate a global backbone, and as part of running backbone, we see lots and lots of noise in the routing table. So this presentation is about the noise in the routing table. Strange to go for that. We got a small technical glitch. So on the introduction part, we see a lot of noise in the routing table, and we started looking at how the top 3 AS